All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skype a Scientist Live. Today, we are going to be talking all about how we get human medicines from nature, from plants. We'll be talking with chemist Josh Kellogg. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So for everybody in the classroom or at home or in the library, wherever you are, as you have questions throughout the live stream today, please submit them to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then I will ask them all out loud. So we hope you brought yourselves curious today. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Josh, to introduce yourself, say who you are, what you do, and why you like it.
Great. Well, thanks again for everyone who's here. As Sarah said, I'm Josh Kellogg. I'm a faculty member here at Penn State University, and we study plants and fungi. We study mushrooms too, and our main goal is to try and find new medicines from nature. Right, and what a lot of people don't realize is that of all the medicines that we take, of prescription medicines, more than half have their origins in nature. And if we look at specific categories, like if we're trying to fight cancer, that number goes up to almost 80%, right? So we have a huge wealth of potential chemistry and compounds that are all around us. But the discovery process can be a long time in coming. And so that's what we focus on. We do a lot of field work. We go collect plants. We work with other entities that have other knowledge. So we do a lot of what we call ethnobotany. So we work with traditional communities, traditional healers, we might call them medicine men and women. And we work in a very reciprocal manner. So we treat them with the respect that they deserve because they have a huge body of knowledge that we don't have. And so we work together to try and uncover how their plants can positively impact our health. That's been a really exciting piece of our work as well. So we look at traditional knowledge. Sometimes we just go out and respectfully collect as whatever plants we can, keeping in mind that we want to be sustainable, of course, in our collection. We work with botanical gardens and arboretums all across the country to source new plants and mushrooms and fungi. And then we dig into the chemistry. That's our bread and butter. So I have just a couple short clips of kind of what it shows, like the life of a student in our lab or my lab, and myself as well. So take a peek and I'll kind of narrate as we go through these. So share. Can we see the videos? Hopefully. There we go. Awesome. Right, so this is actually starting off. This is just kind of in our local university arboretum. These are some of our undergrads out collecting, with permission, collecting plants from cedar and juniper trees that we're looking for new antibacterials. So we're looking to try and kill infectious diseases, bacterial diseases, but we also work on things like we work on COVID, tuberculosis, fungal diseases, and here you can see we've collected a small sample. What's really important as we're doing this work is that we identify the plants that we collect. We need to know what they are. So if we need to go back and get more, or if someone says, hey, what is that plant? I'd like to look at that one too. We have a record of what we've collected. And so here are some examples from our lab of pressing. So we collect one extra snippet so that we can press it and store it. So later we can come back and say, oh yeah, this plant was really interesting. Let's go find more. Well, it's now all dried and ground up and doesn't look like a plant anymore. What was it? And we can go back to these records and figure out what plants we were collecting. Some of these are basil. We're looking at basil species and different cultivars of basil. I think that's what most of these plants are. And then it comes to the extraction. So we got to get the molecules out of the plant once we've harvested it. So essentially we make teas using different solvents and different procedures. So here you see we're shaking up the plant, the ground up plant, to make teas. Here we're drying off our tea to make the extract. And then we're making different extracts here. So here's one of our students. This was from a couple of years ago when we were still masking all the time. But shaking up, these were elderberry. We were looking at elderberry chemistry. And then we go in and do testing. So here's one of our bacteria labs where we're growing bacteria and treating them with our different extract plants. And then we also have a huge number of instruments that tell us what the chemistry is inside these plants and fungi mushrooms. And so that's, those are just brief snippets. We have different students working on different parts of this process, as well as lab staff and sometimes me. I sometimes get in the lab too, if I'm lucky.
I feel like your work is unique among a lot of scientists, because when we think of scientists in movies, you have these bottles with bright colors, and most of us are working with clear liquid to clear liquid, and you actually
Yeah.
have the quintessential movie scientist videos. That pink liquid was so bright. Love it. So in that spinning orb looking thing that was drying the compounds or whatever exactly it was in there, once it's dried to the glass, how the heck do you get it out? I feel like that's a dishwasher's nightmare. How do you get the stuff off the dried glass?
It really can be. So what we usually do is we try to get it so it's just slightly still liquid, and then we can transfer it over to a smaller vial where we dry it down completely. But yeah, oftentimes if it dries all the way, there's a lot of scraping involved.
Yeah.
Just chiseling it out without hopefully breaking the glass.
Right.
Which has happened.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So typically, if you're going to a new place, or if even you're locally in Pennsylvania, when you go out into the woods, do you have a huge database of all the plants you've tested so far and plants that you still have left to test?
Yeah, so we have a record of all of the ones we've collected, where they were collected, or who we got them from. If we have plants that are donated from gardens or individuals. And then we usually have usually when we go out, we have a targeted list. We're after these particular plants because they have traditional activity. They're similar to plants that we know have activity that we want to look at for new chemistry. So usually we have a short, and we also usually, because we get permission before we collect the wherever we're collecting, whether it's a state forest or university property, they like to know what we're getting and how much we're taking. So we provide them with a list.
Cool. So let's say we have I know aspirin came from, am I right? Willow bark, right? Like a tree bark.
Yeah.
Aspirin came from that. Cool. So to make one pill of aspirin, how much bark needed to, how much bark did you need to make that pill?
To make one pill, you would not need a lot. I would say you need, to get the pure compound, you might need about a small handful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, we got questions coming in from also from Pennsylvania. Alejandro from New Holland, Pennsylvania. Have you ever had an accident in your lab?
Oh, yes. So we work really hard to be safe. Of course, our students, as you saw, were wearing gloves and goggles and lab coats, but accidents happen. We had I've had accidents myself, so mostly the accidents are broken glass. We drop things, they spill, we clean it up. We did have a student once who was working with nasty bacteria, and she was gathering up the trash, and not a needle, but a piece of glass pipette poked through the bottle and into her hand.
Ooh.
Through the glove, it sliced right through the glove. So luckily she's fine, totally fine. But yeah, accidents do happen. Luckily, knock on wood, no one's ever been seriously hurt. And we have regular, of course, we get checked up on regularly to make sure we're all following good procedures to keep everything.
Yeah. One time in the lab, I was spinning. So sometimes when you're in the lab, you can grow bacteria in liquid, and then you want to get all the bacteria from floating around in the liquid down to the bottom. And so we whip things around really fast to get them to come to the bottom. And I was working with the type of bacteria that if you ever get food poisoning from an oyster, that was the bacteria that I was working with that day. And my hands were slippery from, I don't even know, from something. And the bottle fell out of my hand and exploded in such a way that a wave of bacteria liquid got in my nose, in my eyes, in my mouth, everywhere. And I was like, I'm going to have a bad night. It was actually, I was look, spit everything out and wash my face, and no food poisoning, which was Felt like a lab miracle that
Yeah,
day.
that does feel like a miracle.
Can't believe it. Yeah, very grateful that day. And now I'm a little bit braver when I eat oysters. I'm like, I can handle this.
It's like, I'm immune. I got this. Let's
Yeah, maybe
go.
I can handle this. Don't believe that. I shouldn't think that. But anyway, okay. Next we've got let's see. Sanal would like to know, do you have any recommendations for books that talk about plants as medicine?
Oh wow, yeah. There's a wide number of books that talk about plants as medicine. Everything from there are books that you can find that give recipes if you're so inclined to kind of make your own teas or tinctures at home. If you're looking for just general knowledge about medicinal plants, one of the ones that we use a lot. I don't know if you can see this really easily. Ah,
Oh, it's blurring it.
yeah,
Oh, there we go.
there we go. It's called Native American Medicinal Plants. It's by Daniel Moorman, who's out of Michigan. And as you can see, like there's lots of tabs. Like we read this book, you know, cover to cover almost from time to time. And this was great because it talks about he collated all of the knowledge that he could find from different Native American communities and what plants they might use, what parts of the plants, and what they were used for. So it's almost like an encyclopedia. It's not totally interesting reading, but it is very useful for us.
Cool.
The one other book, let me step away, let me grab it off the shelf. One real quick. I will highlight because she's a fantastic researcher and a great writer. But if you have not read The Plant Hunter by Cassandra Quave, she is an ethnobotanist and natural products chemist who has done amazing work. But this is kind of her personal story, but it's a fascinating read. So a really good book to read also.
Very cool. Is the person who wrote the Native American medicinal plants book also Native American?
Ooh, good question. I don't know if Daniel Moorman is or not.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Locust Grove, Virginia. Dior. What is the most important medicine that we've gotten from plants so far?
Oh,
It's hard to say.
I mean,
Depends on what disease
that's
you
hard
have
to
in that moment.
say. Yeah, I mean, we can go all the way, or we can go back thousands of years, but we can talk about drugs like, the first anti-malarial drug, like quinine, that was found and used back in the 16th, 17th century by sailors.
Yeah.
And it's kind of modern replacement, artemisinin, which comes from wormwood plants, which was found in China. I mean, those plants have saved millions of lives, but or we talk of cancer, right? We have Taxol, which was found in the Pacific yew tree, is a main anti-cancer drug against some stomach cancers, some breast cancers, ovarian cancers, and again, saved potentially, it's a frontline drug, saved millions of lives. There's a lot of examples. We've had a lot of really great success stories from plants and fungi and other natural resources over the last few centuries.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is from Braden from Locust Grove, Virginia. What's the difference of medical benefits of CBD versus THC?
Good question, Braden. So THC is the very well-known, well-documented psychoactive substance that's found in cannabis or marijuana. And it has some medicinal benefits. We've been finding it helps sometimes with, there's a medication that uses formulation of cannabis for seizures. It has been cannabis in general has been helpful for helping increase appetite and decrease nausea associated with chemotherapy. So maybe if you're taking Taxol, you'll be recommended cannabis preparation as well. CBD, on the other hand, there's related structurally as far as their chemistry goes, but CBD is not psychoactive. It doesn't have any of the getting high kind of effects that we think of as with marijuana. But it has been shown to have a lot of benefits as well. Arthritis, inflammation, gut health. The list is we're learning more and more about these compounds as time goes on, and we're finding more potential benefits. But they're definitely different substances.
Different stuff, yeah. All right. Our next question comes from Mr. Salvaggio's third grade class. When do people get to try the medicines to see if they work?
Oh, great question. For good reason. It is a long process from when we first pick the plant to when we actually give it to people. And there's two things that go into that. One, the most important was we have to make sure it's safe, right? There's a lot of compounds, a lot of plants and fungi and other organisms. They produce chemicals that are for their own benefit and for their protection and are extremely toxic, which is why I always put in my safety notes, do not just go out and eat random plants or mushrooms you find in the forest. It's a recipe for not a good day. So we always, the safety is a big thing. So we go through a lot of testing on cells, animal cells, human cells, and then into animals to make sure that it's not going to have any real detrimental effects before it goes into. We also make sure it works, right? There's a lot of times that there anecdotally it works, maybe even works in some preliminary work in the lab, but then if we put it into a more complex system like an animal, it suddenly doesn't. And there's a ton of reasons why that might not happen. But at that point, we don't want to waste the time and effort in kind of giving it to people. So it's a long process before we even think about having humans try some of these preparations or these molecules that we're finding. Because we want to keep you safe. You're kind of important. We want to keep you around.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we got another question from New Holland, Pennsylvania, from Annie this time. How many mice would you estimate you use maybe during a month of testing?
That is a good question. And we don't actually do a ton of mice testing ourselves, since we're really focused on the chemistry side. We have great partner labs that do a lot of the animal testing when we get to that stage. And it really will depend on the study. If we're looking for dosing, we're trying to figure out how much to give an animal or thinking about later on humans and look at safety. The simplest experiment would have a control group, so animals that don't get any treatment, and then our treatment group. And they would have anywhere from 6 to 12 animals per group. So on the small side, the study would have a dozen to 2 dozen animals. For larger studies, if we're doing long-term studies or toxicity or reproductive effects, like anything we want to look at, then we would have more animals. But they play an incredibly important role in helping us, prove that they're safe, prove that they have effectiveness in an animal. Again, before we would even consider taking it to a human. Yeah. They're good partners in our science.
Absolutely. And anytime any of us use animals in science for experiments, we have to go through a process that's called IACUC. Don't ask me what IACUC stands for, but it's basically a group of people, some of whom are just community members. They're not scientists, and they kind of assess what the scientist is proposing to do and either approve or reject what we're doing. And sometimes that group might say, actually, you need to use a little bit more animals than you are proposing, because we want to make sure that if you're going to use an animal, that the results are useful enough to be worth the animal's either life or time effectively. And so, this is not something that any of us take lightly. And we're not the only ones making the decisions. It's groups of people that all, really go through the ringer before an animal is active in science.
That's true. Yeah, their whole, sorry, not to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Their whole job is to the safety and the welfare of the animals first. Yeah. They don't care about our research.
Right.
Their job is to make sure that we're treating the animals as humanely and nicely as possible.
Yeah, for sure. Alrighty. This is from New Holland too. Have you ever had a medicine go from plant, then you hand it off to somebody else, and then it actually becomes used in a human?
I wish. We've not had, partially because we're newer in the lab. We have not made it through clinical trials into an actual FDA, like an actual medication. We're at the discovery stage. So we have things that are moving into animal studies, which is the first, the next step before we hit human trials. But no, we don't have anything yet, I'll say, that's made its all the way through.
It can take so long sometimes that
I mean,
might
this
not
process
know
can
until
take
your hair is gray.
7, 10, 15 years sometimes. So
For sure.
I've-
Cool. The next question from Karen: what is your favorite plant to work with?
it's like asking your favorite child. Right? I mean, there's like, so we have been working with we have a lot of great plants that we I would say right now, I'll say the most interesting one that we're working on is a plant called the ghost pipe. Now, the ghost pipe, it grows across most of the US, all up and down the eastern range, out in the Pacific Northwest, it grows as well, in forested areas. And it's a really weird plant because it doesn't photosynthesize. It's a plant, but it's not green, it's completely white, hence the ghost. It turns out that it's a parasite. It grows on fungi in the ground, and it steals their nutrients in order to grow. And I love it because it's a fascinating looking plant. And then it also has a lot of traditional use behind it for pain, some anxiety, inflammation, things like that. But then when you go and you look at the research, no one's ever looked at this. No one knows what its chemistry is. There was one study done in 1886 that thought that it might be toxic. So, but we've learned a lot about chemistry since 1886, and no one's really followed up with this. But you can go online and you see tons of videos about how to harvest the ghost pipe or why not to harvest the ghost pipe. And so they're all trading in this information, but no one really knows what's in it. Is it actually effective? Is it toxic? We don't know. So that's been our most interesting plant the last couple of years that we've been.
Awesome. Thanks. I've seen those before. They're so weird and so cool.
Yeah.
All right. The next question is from South Portland High School in Maine. Are there any farming industries that produce crops solely for medicinal purposes?
Yes, there are. So, there are companies that do grow plants just for extracts and herbal medicines. And you can find them I'll say a lot of states. Like we have some here in Pennsylvania. I have friends who work at these farms and companies in Colorado, Utah, Washington, California, North Carolina. So they're quite spread out around the country. But there are dedicated farms, seed companies, and manufacturers that grow plants for the sole purpose of making medicines.
Cool. Thanks. We've got a question from Werner High School biology class in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. What path did you take to lead you to this career?
Great question. So I have always been fascinated with chemistry. Since before high school, I have loved chemistry. I always thought it was really unique how these tiny things put together and they make up everything around us, right? From the wood of your desk to your own eyeballs, right? And so I was a chemistry major in college, and I was trying to figure out what type of chemistry I wanted to do. What did I want to research or what I want to do with it? And I loved what we call organic chemistry, which is the chemistry of life. So these small molecules that are incorporated into plants and animals and fungi and all around us. That really fascinated me. And I took a class in college completely randomly. It was on medical ethnobotany. And it was a couple of professors who were talking about how indigenous cultures use plants as medicine all across the globe, really, and how this is translated into some of the amazing medicines that we have today. And that got me thinking. I was like, well, this is really an intersection of everything I love. I like nature. I love hiking and camping and being out in the wilderness. I love chemistry. I love health. Like it had a really interesting health impact. And so this was kind of this field was kind of for me, the convergence of all these different aspects of my life that I love, and I could kind of tie them all together. And so that's when I was thinking about after college, what I wanted to do, and going into graduate school, which is more school to specialize our knowledge and become experts in a particular field. That is what really clicked with me, that this is what I wanted to do and spend my time.
Very cool. Thanks. Our next question comes from Mr. Salvaggio's class again. Did they make plants to make the vaccine for COVID?
They did not, right? So the COVID vaccine that you may have had, or hopefully you've had, and maybe several rounds of, is actually is not derived from plants. It's an mRNA vaccine, right? So they use part of the genetic code of the virus against itself. So it kind of primes our immune system to recognize COVID and be ready to fight it if we're ever exposed to it. But the COVID vaccine is not from plants.
Great. Sounds good. All right. We've got this question a couple different times, a couple different ways, including from Montebello High School and Karen and some others. Is there one like plant that's like a super plant, like that many different therapies or medicines have come from?
There are several plants that we see come up time and time again. One of them, and this is a genus, right? So this is a little broader than one species, but Artemisia is a genus that is, it makes an incredible number of different molecules within the plant. And it has been shown in different cultures all across the globe to have very powerful medicinal effects. And so Artemisia, there's two really famous cases of Artemisia chemistry. One is artemisinin, right? It's a powerful anti-malarial. And it was the thought behind it was actually discovered in a 2,000-year-old Chinese medical text. She was reading this text and it mentioned this one species of Artemisia, and UU2 tracked it down and she isolated it and went on to win the Nobel Prize for this discovery. So there's Artemisia. It was also famously, or maybe infamously, part of absinthe, right? The kind of mysterious liquor of the 19 teens and 20s. I can't just say 20s anymore because we're in the 20s again.
We're in them again.
So, but beyond that, it has been, Artemisia has been shown to have a lot of anti-infectious disease applications beyond malaria. It's been shown to help immune response, digestive issues, so it's been used in many cultures for many different purposes. So Artemisia is one of the ones that is kind of a powerhouse, and I have colleagues and friends who swear by it as a general health tonic.
Cool, awesome, thank you. Here's a really fun or interesting question from Gabby from San Diego, California. Can you speak a little bit about ethical resourcing? Are there plants that are in danger of being wiped out due to overuse? And should we start planting those things in our own spaces to help?
That's a fantastic question. So right now, there are not necessarily plants that are in danger from overuse from a medicinal standpoint. Right? If there have been cases where we have found the science has found plants that are so efficacious that we want to turn them into medicine, and then you have specific farming entities that are created to farm enough to create the medicine, so we don't go into the woods and harvest everything that we can find. There are some medicines that have traditional or more specialized uses that are gathered illegally and put them at risk of extinction. I think of like American ginseng and things, ginseng relatives like that grow along the Appalachian, here in the Northeast, and they are illegal to harvest from state, federal lands. But every year there's some people who get caught for poaching these kind of things. The larger issue that a lot of plants face is extinction from environmental degradation, right? So their environments are being torn down, deforestation. And so from that aspect, we think of we're kind of at a race between, can we find these plants? Can we identify useful plants before we lose them? There are about 350,000 different species of plants worldwide. probably less than 1% of those, and that's maybe being generous, have really been looked at for their chemistry and their potential to help us, right? So, but we're losing a lot to, like I said, deforestation, huge agricultural processes. Like there's a lot that goes on that's threatening these other plants that maybe we don't know about, right? And we might not know about them until it's too late.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Our next question is from South Portland High School in Maine. What do you know about the use of psilocybin to treat depression?
So psilocybin is not from a plant, right? It's from a fungus, right? It's from a mushroom. And there's been a huge uptick in interest in psilocybin in the last, we'll say about 10 years, because more and more studies have shown that taking, small doses, or sometimes, we'll just say taking small doses of these mushrooms can have a really powerful effect on mental well-being, right? And we know that they're psychoactive. There's a long history of taking these sort of mushrooms for mind-altering, more recreational purposes, but that's now being translated into, if we can control the dosing and actually do this in a controlled way, we might see tangible benefits to mental health, to depression. A lot of this research is in its early days, partially because psilocybin and these mushrooms are illegal to possess and to grow, here in the United States. So you have to get special permission to have them in a laboratory if you wanted to do this kind of work, and it's a long process. So, but the results that we've seen so far are really promising, and so hopefully this will prompt more research to come online, and we'll find more about it.
Great, thanks. We got a question from Kevin from Locust Grove, Virginia. Are there any poisonous plants in their raw form that become medicine once processed in your lab?
Not necessarily in our lab, but there are lots of cases where, we see plants that are poisonous, and they do require some sort of processing, usually cooking, right, to, break down the toxic entities and make them either palatable for food. I think of like cassava roots and things like that have glycoside, several different glycoside poisons in them. But once you cook them, they break down, and then it's safe to eat. So there's definitely plants that do have this effect where we can cook them or heat them or process them in some way to rid them of their toxic potential and leave the nutritious or medicinal pieces behind. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Our next question, is the medicine considered organic since it comes from plants?
So the designation of organic really depends on how the plant is grown, right? And so just like in the grocery store, you can have apples that are organic or not organic. These plants can be organic or not organic. I would say by and large, the companies that invest in medicinal plants, farms that invest in this, do use organic principles, right? So low to no pesticides, more natural fertilizers, no herbicides, things like that. And of course, if you find plants in the wild and collect them in the wild, like we do, those are organic because they're not touched by humans at all. So we would consider them.
Great, thanks. We got another question from Montebello High School seniors. Are there true medicinal benefits we've kind of touched on this a little bit with a couple of them. Are there true medicinal benefits in plants used in making drugs such as coca leaf, poppy seeds, or psilocybin? And do you think there should be fewer regulations in this field to allow for further study?
That is a big question. There's a lot going on there, right? So the answer, the first part is yes, there's definite medical benefits to a lot of these plants, right? If you take the opium poppy right off the bat, the Papaver somniferum, right? A lot of our analgesics that are used in the dentist office, in the doctor's office, in the ER, in the operating room, have their origins from the poppy. We think of codeine, we think of Novocaine, these are all Novocaine's coca, sorry. But a lot of these come from coca plants or the opium poppy, right? So yes, we talked about psilocybin just a minute ago. So there's definite benefits to these. the policy questions, and I'm not a policy expert, but the policies were developed because they have the potential to be abused. And so the question becomes, from people who look at policy and who are smarter than me, at what point do the benefits of these plants, having these plants personally, outweigh the risk of their overuse and their addictive some of them have very addictive tendencies. We see that with opium and coca leaves, cocaine from coca leaves. So whether or not they should be less restrictive, I think really is going to be a decision on how we can use them safely and effectively without treading into more, the dangers that they can pose. And that's a question that still remains unanswered, unfortunately.
Thanks. Our next question comes from Garden Spot Middle School. We learned the other day that dandelions were introduced to North America by Europeans who were using it for medicine. Is it used today in any modern medicines?
Oh, good question. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head for dandelions. They are not toxic, and so a lot of people include them in salads. You can collect the flowers or the plants and toss them in a salad or stir fry them with some other veg or protein. But I'd have to get back to you on if there's specific medicinal properties of dandelions.
Cool. Sounds good. Scientists, we know a lot. We don't know everything.
That's right.
That's a good lesson to learn early, for sure. All right. Willa from Locust Grove, Virginia wants to know, do antidepressants come from plants?
There are some plants that do have antidepressant capabilities, right? So the maybe most famous example is St. John's, right? So St. John's wort is a beautiful little plant. It grows here in the United States, it grows in Europe, and it has several compounds within it that have been shown to treat depression. And in some countries, I know in Germany, you can actually get a prescription for St. John's wort as a medical preparation, as kind of a first line therapy for antidepressant. So yeah, there's definitely plants out there that make antidepressant. We talked about psilocybin as a potential antidepressant. Fungus, not a plant, but still. So yeah, there's definitely possible ones out there.
Great, thanks. Ms. Scholl's class from Toronto wants to know, have you ever used Mayapple? We have a student in the class that grows this plant at home.
Oh, so Mayapple is one that actually is used in in cancer, right? So there are several compounds that were found in Mayapple that they don't grow. Now they synthesize it in a lab. They don't grow Mayapple for that purpose anymore. But that was the original discovery was from Mayapple for cancer. So yes, it is.
We got a question from Bridge. Do you forage for your own medicine ever?
We do, yeah. So there's a balance because not all the plants that grow around us can treat everything. But as fall comes in, we definitely go collect elderberries and make syrup from elderberries. Great for fighting off colds and flus, and as a general immune boosting kind of tonic. We do forage mushrooms, right? So not necessarily for medicinal purposes, but we culinarily, morel season is right now. So people are out finding morel mushrooms that can be delicious. So yeah, we do find some. We have a goldenrod that grows out here that we use. You can take the sap from it and rub it on bee stings or spider bites or things like that that are really great. So yeah, we definitely do.
Awesome. I've got a question from Heather from Chicago, Illinois. What is the shelf life of a tincture made from plants?
Oh, so that the shelf life depends on how it's made, right? We generally, when we make extracts and we dry them down, we save them. We find that they're stable for probably a couple of years. Now, if they're in solution, if they're in water or glycerol or alcohol, that shelf life is probably lower. But usually, I would say we would probably keep them for about a year. So, especially if it's kept in the dark, in the fridge or somewhere cool. Yeah.
Great. We've got a question from Jack. Are there any medicines from plants that we use on animals?
Oh, yeah. So there's a huge interest in using medicinal plants or natural products to help keep our animals healthy, right? And so everything from there's, people looking at using cannabis, like, CBD kind of things for dog health, osteoarthritis and joint pain in larger dogs can be pretty debilitating. So using these CBD chews can help them alleviate the arthritis. Um, we use a ton of different medicines for all sorts of animals, like horses, companion animals, like, cats, dogs, things like that. So, and a lot of the same medicines that we use for humans can also be used. It's not one to one, but there's a lot of overlap in the medicines that we can use for humans and what can be used on animals. And so, yeah, there's plenty of medicines that come from plants or mushrooms or from the natural world that can be used for animal health too.
Great. Rafaela wants to know, what is the best way to make a tincture? I see that some people use alcohol and some don't.
So alcohol, yes, is the main way that people make tinctures. So usually it's a really strong alcohol that doesn't have a lot of flavor to it. People use vodka or Everclear, things like that. But some people, but when we say this, so when you use a tincture, you're using just a couple drops of it. So you're not really getting any sort of alcohol effect necessarily. But some people don't like alcohol. They want to stay away from it completely. And so you can use things like glycerol to extract that is, it's sugary, it's more syrupy. Some people, you can boil it in water, you basically make a tea out of it as well. And depending on the preparation, you'll be pulling different molecules out of the plant. Alcohol is the most common way that we see tinctures made, and it's a really good solvent to pull the chemistry out of a plant. But you can there are definitely alternatives.
So this is like something that I've never understood as a molecular biologist. We have these compounds that exist in plants that are, mostly moving stuff around with water based stuff. And then the compound itself may be most soluble in alcohol. And so for the younger grades who have maybe talked about polarity, we talk about like some things are more soluble in water, and some things are more soluble in alcohol, and it depends on the polarity of the molecule, right? Could you kind of talk a little bit about like solubility and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so depending on the structure of the molecule, so what atoms make it up and how those atoms are arranged, right? They have this what we call polarity. So this is their tendency to be dissolved in what we think of as polar solvents, that like water, is H2O, there's a lot of oxygen in there, which is very polar. Or they're very non-polar and they dissolve in like oils, right? So if you've ever used a vinaigrette dressing, right, you know that some parts of the dressing stay up in the oil part and some stay kind of down in the watery part or the vinegar part, right? And then when you want the dressing, you shake it. And so that's the difference in polarity. The oil is very non-polar and sits on top of the more dense, the polar water, or vinegar, right? For example. So we use different polarity to extract the chemicals that we want, right? So some molecules really like to be in the oils, right? And we can make essential oils from them and distill them out to capture them. Whereas others really prefer to be in more polar solvents like alcohol, glycerol, water. So we can play with, when we're doing stuff in the lab, we can play with that tendency for the molecule to be more polar or less polar. But it's a great question because you're right. Plants are not vinaigrettes, right? They use water and aqueous systems to transport these molecules up and down. The proteins that make these molecules are all encased in cellular, aqueous kind of solutions. So it's tough when we get them into a more isolated form that sometimes their polarity means that they don't really like going back into water. And that's really annoying because it'd be great if everything worked in water and we could just go with that. But chemistry is
Tricky.
a cruel mistress sometimes.
Right. Great. All right. We got one final question, and then we're going to ask our final two questions that we ask everybody. Which plants will keep mosquitoes away?
So there's a number of really good plants that keep mosquitoes. Things like, of course, I'm blanking. The lavender will keep, if you're growing plants in your yard, right? Lavender, calendula, plants like that they smell great, but also have been shown to try and keep the mosquitoes away. And you can also take extracts from those plants and use them on your skin. They're safe for your skin, and they tend to mask your skin so that mosquitoes don't smell human around them, and can try and decrease your bite.
Great. I'm going to use that this summer because the mosquitoes in my house are terrible. But that came in from
citronella plants is a good one.
Great. Cool. Okay, so we are now at time. Here are the questions that we ask every scientist that we have on our series. The first question is, in this hypothetical situation, you have everyone's attention in the whole world, and you could tell them one thing about your area of expertise, or from within your area of expertise. What do you tell them?
I would tell them that nature is wonderfully complex and beautiful, and we should protect it not just for our own interests, but for its own sake. But we do have a lot of vested interest in keeping our environment, broadly speaking, keeping our environment healthy and keeping plants and animals around.
Great. Thanks. The second question is very similar. We still have everyone's attention in the world, and we can tell them one thing about anything. It can be serious and significant and important, or it can be silly and frivolous. Either is totally acceptable. What do you tell them?
Oh man. I would say never stop exploring. Always be out there asking questions, pushing boundaries, and learning new things, because that's a real gift that we get. So don't lose sight of it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and share all of your knowledge. Thank you all in the audience for coming. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, plug, anything like that before we say goodbye?
I can think of anything. Thank you for having me on. You guys all had fantastic questions. I'm blown away by what great questions you asked. And yeah, this is a great opportunity, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming. Everybody at home, or at school, we are having another one of these sessions on May 15th. We are going to be joined by the very silly and charismatic Greg Pask, who will be talking to us about bugs, but from the perspective of Pokemon. Greg likes to dress up like a Pokemon trainer and talk about bugs. And so we're going to be doing that together. Greg is a professor at Middlebury College up in Vermont. That's going to be a silly fun time. So hope to see you then. Also, as you know, our program for free matches your classrooms with scientists. We have a lot of scientists that have not been matched yet this semester. And so please tell other teachers, librarians, homeschool groups, whoever, that we exist and that we're available for your use. Just go to skypeascientist.com to sign up. We would love to get more scientists into more classrooms around the world this year. So please tell your people, tell your communities. That's it for me. We'll see you in a couple weeks. Thank you, Ashley, for interpreting.
Yes, thank you very much, Ashley.
Great. All right.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you again.
Thanks.
Bye.